So you want to learn a foreign language. Maybe it is because of your job, maybe it is because of school, maybe you want to move to a different country or something like that. If that is the case, this video is for you. This is a full, complete guide on how to learn any language basically, except for maybe languages that have a different writing system. All of the tips that I'm going to say, or at least most of them, are going to apply to those as well. But since I do not have any experience with learning languages that have a different writing system, I'm not going to talk about how to learn a different writing system because I have no idea about it. But yes, this video is, as you can see, very long probably, and this is not going to be very editing heavy like the rest of my videos because I have a full-time job and I have a weekly uploading schedule, so I don't have like 50 hours to put b-roll on top of this, and also that's not the point. Today you have to pay attention to what I'm saying. Everything is going to be valuable, and this is also experimentation with a different format. I'm also planning to make videos like this on other topics. This is just something where in like 40 minutes or maybe an hour I just say everything that I can about a certain topic. But who the fuck am I, and why do I think that I can preach about language learning? Am I a language teacher? No, I am a language learner. But since luckily you want to learn languages as well, it's best to hear an advice from somebody who's a language learner maybe. I am also not going to teach you any language or anything. Again, I am not a teacher, but I have quite a bit of experience with learning languages. I speak 4 languages. If we also count my mother tongue, those are Hungarian, English, Norwegian, and Icelandic. I speak all of these fluently, yes, on different levels. My best is Hungarian, then English, then Norwegian, then Icelandic, but all of them I speak fluently. And I'm not going to tell you how old I am right now because it doesn't even matter, but at the point where I was 18, I already spoke all of these languages fluently. Since then, I improved a bit on some languages, but mostly it's somewhat the same. There's not much of a difference. And also, besides that, if that wouldn't be enough for you, I work with my 4th language every day. I am not in the country where I was born. I moved and I am working in customer service. I work in a bakery. I sell stuff to people. So I have to talk with people in this language every single day. And keep in mind that this is a language that 2 years ago I didn't speak a word of. The only word I knew was og, which means and. I also didn't live in these countries before learning the languages fluently. And then also, I didn't have any relationships with native speakers. I learned Norwegian and Icelandic without knowing a single person who's Norwegian or Icelandic. I think pretty much the same with English. I've had relatives in the UK, I think, and some places, yeah, but in my entire life I've spoken 3 hours total of English with them, so that doesn't really matter. The point is I didn't learn the language in these countries or just by passively just listening to something. I put in the work and I did it myself. Also, I mostly didn't have teachers. I will talk about teachers at some point. I did have teachers at some point, but I only had teachers after already being fluent. And I've had, basically in every language that I've learned, I first reached fluency alone, and then I had a teacher, and usually they didn't really teach me much either. They just explained me next level shit grammar that I will use twice in my life, and mostly we just talked. It was nice to have somebody to talk with because before that I didn't have that, but that's what teachers were for me mostly. I didn't really learn much from teachers. That's not to discredit my teachers. I like them and they're nice people and they're good teachers, but again, I didn't turn to them because I needed teaching. I needed somebody to talk to and then correct me if I'm wrong or something like that. Also, all of these languages are pretty far away from each other, so it's not like I speak Norwegian and Danish and Swedish, because then, like, I guess I could say that I also speak Danish and Swedish, but like, bro, Danish, what the fuck? But I don't, and these languages are not really connected. Where you could think that it's connected is with Norwegian and Icelandic, but it's not connected. If you've tried learning these two languages, which you probably haven't, but if you had, you know that it's nothing like each other. And maybe learning Icelandic first will help with Norwegian, because it is much easier and has some similar words, but I did it reverse. So it's like, you know, when people say, I've heard this all the time, they say, learn German first and then English will be easy. Well, I didn't do that because, well, I wanted to learn English, I didn't want to learn German. But yeah, they say that, and then they also say that if you learn English first, after that German will be a hell. It's pretty much the same with Norwegian and Icelandic. Maybe learning Icelandic first will help a little bit with Norwegian, but learning Norwegian first didn't help me at all with Icelandic. There's not really a lot of words in common. There are some, but they're only good to use the wrong word where you should. So like, it doesn't really help. More so, it just distracts you from speaking the language properly. And again, if any correlation can be drawn, I would say after speaking English, Norwegian is a relatively easy language, but Icelandic doesn't really have much to do with Norwegian. I'm just saying this so that you understand that I didn't learn just one language and like 5 dialects or something that call themselves a different language. It's actually 3 different languages. Now, some people say that I'm talented, that I have a talent for learning languages, but I don't know about that. I did put in a lot of work though. And if you want to call me talented, I don't give a shit. Personally, I know what I did. I speak the languages. I don't give a shit if you say that I'm talented or not. A lot of people try to discredit my work by saying, oh, but you're so talented and it was so easy for you. No, it wasn't. I learned every day. I sat down for years straight every single day to learn, and I've learned languages, yeah, but I had to put in the work. And let's say, but I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but even if I am talented, look, let's not talk about Norwegian because that's a bit easier, but Icelandic, that's considered to be one of the hardest languages. It's surely not the hardest, because I think like Japanese and Arabic and some languages like that are harder, I guess. I don't find Icelandic very hard, but a lot of people say that it is one of the hardest languages for English speakers. I've learned it to speak it fluently in less than 2 years. And so if I'm talented, you can maybe do it in twice as much time, so like 3 years, if you put in the same amount of effort as I do, which wasn't that much. It was like an hour of learning a day, and it wasn't always very effective learning, but I will also talk about that. But the point is, even if it takes you 3 years to do the same instead of a bit less than 2 for me, it's still pretty good. And I would like to add that I sleep and eat better than most people. That is something that a lot of people just don't take into consideration. But when you sleep 6 hours a day and eat shit, and I eat well and I sleep 9 hours a day, it's been clearly shown that this helps a fuck ton. So I know what I'm doing. Yeah, maybe I have an easier time remembering words, but maybe it's not because I'm talented or something. Maybe it's because I also put in the work in other areas of life that channel into language learning. Also, you could say that since I said that I already spoke these languages fluently when I was 18, I had a lot of time because I went to school and I had time, but you don't have time because you have kids and family and all of that shit. I don't give a shit, okay? You have time for what you want to have time. You do whatever you want to. It's not a good excuse because yes, language learning does take time, but you will see that there's a lot of practices that you can do even when you don't have much time to sit down and learn, but you can always listen to okay, maybe not always, but a lot of times you can maybe not put your heart and soul into learning, but you can listen to a podcast or whatever. And so I didn't have too much time either. What I did was I found the little opportunities and the like little empty spaces in my day where I could study, and I just did that. And also right now I'm an adult. I work a full-time job. I have a weekly uploading schedule on YouTube, which takes me like 15 hours of work per week. So in reality, it's like having one job and then also a part-time job. I also go to the gym 4 times a week. I do quite a bit of cardio. I get in my steps. I sleep 9 hours a day and I cook my own food. This is, again, not to flex. This is just that I can do all of this. And if I really wanted to right now, I could probably learn a language. Like seriously, maybe while doing cardio or some shit, but I could definitely still learn a language. Another thing is I don't want to because I don't need another language. So just stop being a pussy, sit down and start. And also if your excuse is having kids, what do you think your kids would think if they knew that what you're saying is basically you're using them as an excuse for being mediocre, for not doing what you want to? You use them as an excuse. You decided to have kids, that's for one, and then second, I don't think your kids really distract you from everything. Maybe if you do things incorrectly, but I'm not going to go into that. But just think about that for a minute. If your kids would know that they are the reason why you're not learning languages, first of all, they would feel like shit. And then second of all, they would probably try to help you. And maybe play for 30 minutes alone while you do your, I don't know, lessons. So in reality, language learning is possible for anybody and everybody. Unless you don't have electricity, you're fighting for food, you're like some... I don't even know, I'm not even going to start it. And also you can learn any language, unless you're trying to learn some sort of tribal language that like 10 people speak, or Danish, since it's not a language, we all know that it's possible, okay? Any language is possible, except what I just said. But before you get into it, I will give you a warning. Only learn a language if you will use it. Yes, maybe it will change your mind about it, but right now if you want to learn a language just for the challenge, because that might be the case, I think you can do something more useful, something that you either don't have to maintain, or something that you just maybe like more. It can be equally as challenging. All I'm trying to say is I have a language that I don't use, but I'm trying to maintain it, and it's a pain in the ass, and I do not recommend it to anybody. So if you know that you won't necessarily use the language that often, maybe if you don't need it, consider not learning it, because if you need it for school, you need it for like a degree or something, that's more understandable. But again, if you just like want to impress people and then you actually learn it, and then you realize that, wait, I actually don't use this for anything. Do you want to sacrifice all of your time to then forget that? No. Or do you want to sacrifice even more time to maintain it? I guess that would be a bit better, since you've already learned the language, but again, it's a pain in the ass and you probably will not have the motivation to use the language. I also want to give you a mindset that is essential for learning languages, which you need to have when you go into it, which is, it's kind of like training. You have to train for years straight, consistently, maybe not every day, but several times a week, and you always have to show up, repeat the task, even if you don't feel like it that day. In a way, language learning is a bit different from training, because when you're training, if you just start doing more and more, it will not necessarily get you that much better. But when it comes to language learning, yes, more is usually better, but the point is, when you're trying to learn languages, what you want to go for is not learning 5-6 hours a day for 2 months and then just burning out and then barely doing anything. Yes, you will probably learn a lot in those 2 months, but you need to do it over the months and years every single day, or at least maybe even if not every single day, just 5-6 days a week at least. So in my opinion, the more frequently you use the language, the better it is. And it's somewhat like training as well. You kind of want to split it up. So you're not going to do 10 sets of, I don't know, biceps once a week. You're going to do like, I don't know, 9 sets and then split it into 3 workouts maybe. And then you do, on Monday you do 3 sets, Wednesday 3 sets again, Friday 3 sets. So it's pretty much evenly split. You should do the same with language learning. So you will need to have discipline, and not having enough time is no excuse. Not having enough time every day is no excuse. You always have time to what you want to allocate your time towards. You also need to understand language learning because there's different parts of language learning. I would separate it into 2 separate pieces. First one, separate piece, this is vocabulary and grammar. You will need both of these, and it won't be that easy to learn, obviously. These are what make up a language pretty much. Vocabulary and grammar. Grammar is kind of sucky, but once you learn it, it's like pretty limited. In terms of vocabulary though, you have an infinite amount of words, okay? That's why also you cannot learn a language completely. You will never know a language completely. Even if, let's say, you know all the words of the language that currently exist, tomorrow there will be a new word. So you will never fully know a language. And it's not even a scale really, because a scale has 2 ends, and speaking a language has really 1 end. You don't know a single word and then you know more and more and more, but there's no other end. Like, you can know all of it. And then the other like segment of language learning is what we really want to focus on. I would split that into 4 different pieces that you will see on the screen, which is writing, reading, speaking, and listening. 2 of these are active, 2 of these are passive, and then again, 2 of these are spoken and 2 of these are written. Passives are usually easier because all you have to do is understand what people say or write. But actives, what I call actives, I don't know if these are official terms, by the way, I just call them that. Actives are a bit harder because speaking, for an example, you have to express your what you're trying to say, and then also with writing. When you're reading a text, you just need to somewhat like know the words, but for example, when you're writing, you have to know the spelling, you have to know when to put spaces and everything like that. So generally, passives are easier, and then also writtens are easier just simply because when you're writing, you have more time to think, because when you're speaking fast and you don't have that much time to speak, like me right now, you don't have that much time to think about what you're going to say. But when you're writing, it's different. This might be a bit different with languages that use a different writing system than what you're used to. So again, I'm not going to tell you advice about that because I have absolutely no knowledge about learning languages with separate writing systems. Now, reading tends to be the easiest because it is passive and it is written, and also you will probably do that the most. There's not much to say about that. Writing is a bit trickier because of spelling. Some people have problems with that, but I would say that writing in general is not that difficult. Listening is what a lot of people struggle with, but in my opinion, that's sort of the easiest to practice. And then also you will realize that yes, listening to stuff like TV shows, movies, podcasts, music is difficult, but when you actually speak to real natives, understanding them will be much easier, and also you will be able to tell them to speak slower, speak more understandably, and like all of that shit. If you don't understand something, you can tell them to say it again, explain it, say it in English as a last resort, but we will go back to that later. What will be the most underdeveloped in most people is speaking. And that is simply because I think it's the hardest skill personally, because again, it's active and also it's spoken. So you have to do it quickly and you have to do it correctly. You have to express yourself, and there's a lot of shit to think through, and so it's very difficult. And also most people don't practice it. I also did not practice it a lot with Norwegian. I didn't really speak to anybody ever before getting a teacher, and then I changed that with Icelandic because I already knew that speaking is very important, and even if you've learned for years, it doesn't mean that you can speak. So it's essential to practice speaking. It doesn't matter who you are in ISO. Also, I think that is pretty much the most important skill. So you have to practice it like your life depends on it. Now it's time to start, but where and how to start? You should start with basic vocabulary first, and then also you will probably learn some grammar along with it, and then grammar, and more vocabulary along with it. And then eventually you will be done with grammar, and after that all you will have to learn is vocabulary, and that will be sort of a bit boring in my opinion. For me personally, like, there's not really much to do after knowing all the grammar. All you will have to do is just learn new words, and so basically after that you will just have to use the language as much as possible. Now you can start with a language learning site, a language learning book, or Duolingo for an example, but I would say that Duolingo is not the best option. I used it with Norwegian personally, and I've used it for a lot of time, so I have a lot of experience with it, and it's slow as fuck. It beats the words and also somewhat the grammar into you. Now it has like explanations of grammar, which is really nice, but the problem again is like Duolingo is good if you do everything to like 5 stars, in my opinion. Or like, I don't know what it looks like now, because the last time I've used it was like 2-3 years ago, something like that. But the point is, Duolingo is slow as fuck. You can learn way faster. It is effective, but again, it's really slow, and you could learn the same thing that Duolingo teaches you in any language in like a third of the amount of time, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't recommend Duolingo. It will be harder to learn on your own. You will maybe use a language learning book, which I personally recommend if you can find a good book, but it will also require you to be good and to just write out the words, translate everything, because a book in and of itself doesn't really do much. What matters is what you do with the book. Something that is a really good start is a language learning book with flashcards. Okay, you use a language learning book, and I don't really know if there's like double language learning books. I didn't pay attention in school, sorry, but the language learning book that I've used for learning Icelandic was purely in Icelandic, so I didn't understand shit from it. What I did always was translate what I didn't understand, but only words, okay, not entire sentences and stuff like that. Translate it word by word, and then you will also write out the words that you do not understand and make flashcards of them, and then you will learn that at the end of every lesson or chapter or whatever, and then that will take you really, really far. And also obviously learn the grammar, do all of the tasks, read what you have to, and then if there's a writing task, write. If there's a speaking task, well, you don't have anybody to speak to, so you have to speak to a wall or a camera or whatever, your dog, it doesn't matter, but you have to do the speaking as well. And don't do it in your thoughts, okay? Do it loudly, even if it's embarrassing. Nobody gives a shit, and you can do it at the comfort of your own home. You can just go home and practice speaking for like 10 minutes. Something that I like to add is the reason why I'm saying practice speaking loudly and not only in your thoughts is because it's way different, okay? And you only realize this when you first start speaking. If you always did the speaking tasks in your language learning book just in your thoughts, you were like thinking through it, you will only realize when you speak out loud how like unprepared you are, essentially, like I am right now. But you get what I mean. So you will only realize then how bad you are at speaking, how much you babble, how much you cannot say a word for like 5 minutes because you have to think of the word. So this is why you need to speak loudly, okay? Thinking is not enough because everything sounds so much better in your thoughts, just so much more prepared and so much faster. But in reality, you will realize that you're not as good. So that's why you need to practice speaking, because when you actually speak loudly, you will realize that you cannot even like say a sentence of 5 words without thinking. So that's why you need to speak and not just do it in your thoughts. You need to say it out loud. You need to speak out loud. This is absolutely essential, non-negotiable, okay? But if you're going to use a book, use it to its fullest, please. Now, for understanding grammar explaining videos and sites will be really useful because you will learn a lot from them. And basically grammar is something that you just kind of have to understand, but like you have to understand it so you can build it into you. But eventually the goal is, it doesn't matter if you understand it or not, because usually the natives themselves, they have no clue about it. They do not understand it. I can tell you stuff that, for an example, for me, Icelandic is like a adult learn language. So I kind of look at it from rules, or at least not that much by now, but I used to do that. Whereas English and Hungarian is not like that. I don't know shit about grammar that is English and Hungarian. Now, when you already know most of grammars, TV shows and movies will be your best friend, because they will let you increase your vocabulary, and it's also really fun. And then again, I said this before, practice speaking and practice it from day one, okay? First day you start learning the language, you learn your first 5 words, you're going to say them out loud. If only once, I don't care. Maybe like 10 times would be a bit more ideal. But the point is, you have to practice speaking from the very first day, and you have to practice it as often as you can. And no, I can't. That's not an excuse, okay? Do you want to speak? Do you want to speak that language? You want to say that, oh yeah man, I speak Japanese. Yeah, you speak Japanese. You don't write Japanese, okay? You speak. That means you're able to speak with people. Now this can be anything. First, just pronouncing words, trying to pronounce them correctly, and then trying to form easy sentences, and then maybe telling stories, and just evolving slowly over time. This video is taking so long to record that I had to go and get a haircut. So, the methods for practicing the 4 different skills. We'll start with the first and easiest skill, which is reading. This is again, in my opinion, the easiest of the 4, and you will do it the most naturally, because whatever you want to do, you have to read. If you want to learn new vocabulary, well, you're probably not going to learn it through hearing it. If you're using Duolingo, you're reading. If you're using a language learning book, you're also reading. If you're reading a book, you're obviously reading. If you're watching movies with subtitles, you're reading. There you go. So you're going to practice reading a lot. So personally, I don't really see the point in practicing reading just like separately, just to get better at reading, because it doesn't really matter and you will use it a lot anyway. So that will probably be the skill that requires the least amount of effort, probably. However, reading is very important when it comes to learning new vocabulary, and you will use it for that. And there's a couple of things you can do. The first one is reading and then learning song lyrics, which can be done and it's fun, but it's not that useful, okay? this is a fun thing to do, and it's nice to discover new music and shit like that, and to discover the culture, what type of music these people listen to in their countries, and all of that stuff. And it's nice to sing along and shit. But this is not the most useful thing, obviously, because you're singing along the same lines all of the time. And also, generally, like, it depends on what type of music you like, but you will not discover very useful vocabulary, probably. If you're listening to rap, you're just, I don't know, a lot of it will be in English. If you're listening to metal, you're going to use words that were used for the last time like 200 years ago. So, like, this is not your main way of learning vocabulary. But something that will be is watching stuff. Movies, TV shows, stuff like that, with subtitles. And I will later tell you how to do this, not right now. But I'm just going to say that hopefully you will do this a lot, and this is very, very useful. If I would tell you the one method that got me the most results in terms of language learning was this one. And then you can also read books, which is useful. You can do it on like the train or bus or something. So it's like portable, and it's pretty simple to learn new vocabulary. But the problem is, in my opinion, with books is that, well, it really depends on how much you know the language, but you will have to pick a book that you're not that interested in, because chances are you will not grasp it as well if you learn it in a different language. And this is like getting not the worst of both worlds, but definitely not the best, okay? And another thing is, books usually have vocabulary that nobody uses. You will meet a lot of fancy words that people don't actually use in real life, and even if you learn them, which even if you do, you will probably forget most of them because you will never use them and you will never hear anybody use them. But if you learn them and you try to use them, maybe people will think you're a fucking weirdo. Like, okay, that's not a huge problem obviously, but I'm just saying books are not that useful and your time could be spent better. Second skill is writing. This is a bit more important, but still not the most important. Now, some people have problems with spelling. I personally never had problem with that, so you can say that I'm talented and all of that shit. If I see a word that's new to me, 99% of the time I will just memorize how it looks and how you have to spell it. But if you have a problem with spelling, in my opinion, one thing that will probably improve it by a lot, and I think is very effective, because words that were a bit more difficult with spelling and that I didn't really know at first, I've learned with this method, okay? Flashcards, make flashcards, but what you do is, but you will not just say the word in yourself, you will see the word in English, and then you will think to yourself, what is this word in the language that I'm learning? And then you will write it down, and then you will turn the flashcard over and see if you wrote it down correctly or not. And this is even more simple with a smartphone. One problem with a phone is if you do a typo, you're fucked, but you're still going to know that you typed it well. Now, if you do not have a problem with spelling and you speak regularly, I just don't see how writing could be a problem, okay? It's going to be much simpler than speaking. And so if you're speaking a lot and your spelling is good, then writing is basically a shittier version, like an easier version of speaking with spelling added, which you're good at, so you don't need to practice writing that much. But writing is one of the active skills, so when you cannot speak, you don't have the opportunity. But writing is one of the active skills, and speaking is the other. And sometimes, you know, just if you're standing on a bus or sitting alone with like your AirPods in and you just randomly, maybe if you have like AirPods in, it's a bit more natural because they will think that you're talking with somebody. But if you're just walking on the street and you start talking in like a different language, yeah, maybe it's not the best opportunity, you know, but you can write like almost whenever, especially that now we have cell phones, so you can just write on your phone. And it is also useful for learning vocabulary, because one thing that's important is when you're reading something, you're learning vocabulary that other people use, but when you're trying to speak or write, so express yourself, and you don't know a word or some kind of phrase, you will learn the stuff that you need, that you want to say, the words that you want to use. Now, when it comes to methods, obviously the best thing you could do to practice writing is to chat with a native speaker. But you probably won't be able to do that because you don't know a single person who's a native speaker of that language and actually wants to chat with you. So in that case, what you can do is go on Tinder. So in that case, no problem. What you can do is write a journal, write a book, random stories, whatever you want to. It really doesn't matter. You just have to write something. I would say that journal is probably not the best idea. That's what I've done personally, and it's a bit restrictive, and also you're getting the worst, not the worst, but again, not the best of both worlds. So both worlds. So when you're journaling, like, you're not getting the best of journaling because you're trying to do it in a different language, and you're not getting the best of writing either because like you're journaling, but you're just writing about what's up with you, but you're not writing other stuff. So it's like not very useful in my opinion. Now, one thing again that's good is you can write on your phone anytime, and one thing that you can do if you're a giga fucking Chad is write song lyrics. Nothing more to say about that. Our third skill is going to be listening. Now, man, you're really lucky, because what you need to be able to listen and understand what people say is to practice a lot. And something that is very easy to practice is listening, because wherever you go, if you're walking on the street, can you speak? It's kind of iffy. Can you write? Obviously no, you're walking on the street. Can you read? Nah. Can you listen? Of course, bro. If you're doing some sort of shitty household work, you can listen to a podcast or whatever. All of that stuff, you can listen a lot. And so I recommend you to listen a lot. And I am going to tell you again that it doesn't matter how much you struggle with listening when it comes to TV shows and music and podcasts and stuff like that. I would say of all of these, probably podcasts are the most understandable, but it will be so much easier talking to actual natives. Okay, when you listen to people talk, it's different. When you're talking with people and you listen to them talk, you can ask them to talk slower. You can ask them to repeat. You can ask them to talk more understandably, like articulate more and shit like that. You know, the stuff that I usually don't do. And you can also ask them to explain a word that you do not understand. You can also ask them to say it in a different language. So it's just way easier, okay? And even if you don't do any of these, you will find that it is going to be easier. And also TV shows and movies, like, they literally like possess some sort of dark magic that makes you completely unable to understand them. Like, sometimes when I look at something, like, even if it's my native language that I learned first after being born, sometimes I just listen to like music or like a show or something, and I don't get what the fuck they're saying. So there's some sort of black magic with TV shows and movies. You just have to accept that. But it's going to be good because you're doing what's the hardest, and after that it's going to be more easy, and you will realize that you actually know more than you realize, and you're better than you knew. Now, when it comes to practicing the skill, obviously the best thing on earth you could do is speak with natives and listen to them talk. Especially if that one language is the only language you two have in common, okay? That's important, okay? Because in reality, if somebody speaks English as well and you do as well, it's very easy to switch, or it's very easy to ask them to say something in English if you do not know it. But that's not always, actually, usually that's not the best solution, okay? If that person only speaks that one language, that's going to be the absolute best for you, because he or she will have to explain it with just that language, what he's trying to say. And if you don't understand it, he or she will have to repeat it with other words and shit like that until you do understand. That is very powerful. But I realized that a lot of people will not have the opportunity to talk with natives. I didn't have that either, and I still speak the languages. And I already spoke when I first talked to natives. So there's absolutely no problem. There's other methods, and you don't need to be able to chat with a native, speak with a native. Again, you don't need any relationships with native speakers in order to learn a language fluently. You can listen to music, which is more so fun, but not the best. We've talked through this already, okay, so it doesn't matter. Now the next thing is you can watch movies and shows with subtitles and also without subtitles. When you're going to try to practice listening mainly, probably you're going to switch the subtitles off, but personally I feel like you have to understand the show first, okay? So you can really only start listening to, or not only, but it would probably be the best to start really watching shows and movies without subtitles when you already understand most of it when you have the subtitles on, and you don't really need them anymore. So there's kind of a progression here, okay? First you will have subtitles, and then after a while you won't. But it's important that the first time when you will turn them off, it will be really shitty. But when you feel like you can't gain much anymore from just reading the subtitles, just turn them off, bro, and you will get used to it, okay? But we'll also talk about this later. The point is, watching movies with subtitles is good for a lot of things. And now probably the best you could do when it comes to listening, which is not speaking with a native, is listening to podcasts and audiobooks. There's also podcasts in certain languages targeted primarily towards language learners. If you don't have that option, you can look up a podcast that is targeted towards children. Maybe that's going to be good for you. But the point is, these podcasts, like those that are targeted towards people who are learning the language, usually they talk slower, or they will explain a word that people might not know in the foreign language and all of that stuff, and they're going to try to talk more understandably and articulate more. So it's going to be really useful. And then you can switch to podcasts that are more like normal people podcasts, that the natives are listening to probably. The reason why podcasts are really nice is because you can listen to them anywhere, anytime. Not anywhere, anytime, but you can listen to them on the bus, on the train, while walking, while doing some household task or something. You can listen to podcasts while doing a lot of different shit. And even if you feel like you don't have any time for language learning, if you have 15 spare minutes and you dedicate that towards like speaking, for an example, and learning vocabulary, and then you also listen to like 45 minutes of podcast a day, that's not going to be the most optimal, obviously, but you will probably have time for that, and it's going to be plenty, okay? It's going to be way better than zero. So that's why listening to podcasts is very nice, but one thing that I dislike when it comes to podcasts is it's very easy to not pay attention and just zone out and go zombie mode and be like, and you're not listening to the podcast, you're not paying attention, so you're not grasping anything. It's even harder to pay attention because like it's a language that you do not understand. And sometimes, for example, when I listen to like something in English, even then I zone out, or something in Hungarian or anything. So it's a bit harder to pay attention because you might be doing other stuff in the meanwhile. And yeah, so that's why I personally prefer shows. And the fourth skill is going to be speaking, which is going to be the most difficult and also the most important, okay? You will have to practice speaking a shit ton and take it very, very seriously. Now, speaking tends to be even more difficult with languages that have a shit ton of rules, like a lot of, how do you say it, conjugations and all of that shit, stuff that you have to pay attention to, like declensions and all of that, okay? Like, personally, if you probably don't know the languages, but I would just explain, Norwegian doesn't really have any of those. It's a very simple language and it's much easier for me to speak. It's sort of like English. But when it comes to Icelandic, that has, what does it have exactly? Genders, single, plural, definitive, not definitive, I hope that that's the right word. We have the 4 cases, then you mix all of those. Then we also have a fuck ton of different kinds of conjugations for every single verb. And then when it comes to adjectives, I think that's what they're called. Some have like more than 100 different forms. Yeah, some of them are going to be the same, but you get what I'm saying. You have to pay attention to everything and you have to use the right version of the word. So it's with those languages that speaking is really difficult. So if you're learning a language like that, you will have to practice speaking even more. And I recommend you to practice it from day 1. This should make up a big portion of your time spent learning the language. Speaking is much more difficult than writing because you don't have infinite amount of time to think about what you're going to write, because you're talking with somebody and you're going to say it. And you can't just be like, okay, wait 1 minute, I'm going to think through what I'm going to say and look through the declension tables and all that shit. No, you have to respond like almost immediately, basically. So the methods: speak to natives. Again, this is going to be the best. Easiest to do if you know somebody who's native, but if you do not know anybody, then, well, it sucks for you. You will have to speak to a wall, to somebody who doesn't understand shit from the language, but is interested in just seeing you suffer. Speak to a camera, whatever. Speak to a fucking apple. Even if you speak to an apple, it's going to be better than not speaking, okay? So if you do not have anybody to speak to, that's absolutely no excuse. You will still have to practice speaking. An idea that you can do is what I personally did, which was speaking to a camera, recording it, and then sometimes I would look back at it and see how much I progressed. And also I would save those videos, most of them. You know, I could have spoken just to myself, but speaking to a camera, to me personally, it felt more like actually speaking to somebody, even if I know that nobody is ever going to see it. And yeah, something you can do is an imaginary YouTube channel, or you can even publish it, it doesn't really matter. The point is you have to speak, okay? And you can say stories, tell stories. You can just tell how your day was and all of that stuff. It doesn't matter, you just have to speak. Something you can do that I've heard about, I haven't really tried it that much. I've heard that one guy, what he did to learn a language insanely fast was he would tell a story, record it, see after that where he was wrong and where he like didn't know something, check it, translate it, all of that stuff, and then record it again, do it again, repetition, and then for like the 10th time it was much better, okay? So you can do this every day, tell the same story for a week and see how it's going to look like on the 7th day. You will have much more vocabulary to tell what you wanted to say for the first try. And yeah, obviously when you don't know something, look it up. You can, if you're recording it, you can look it up after, but who the fuck is going to do that? You're not going to do that, okay? Or at least I never did that. So what you can do is look it up immediately and then say the sentence as you want it to. Now that we're done with that, I'm going to tell you everything that I've tried what has worked, what hasn't, what I recommend, what I don't. And so the first thing on my list is going to be Duolingo, the language learning app that I've used to learn Norwegian. And it's not the best, really. My personal problem with Duolingo is that it takes way too much time. It's effective in reality because I still remember most of the things that I've learned with Duolingo. So it's effective, it will beat the shit into you, but the problem is it is like that because it's extremely slow and repetitive, okay? With a language learning book and flashcards, if you use them correctly, you will be able to learn much faster and more effectively. So I don't really recommend Duolingo unless you're very lazy and you need a bit of a kickstart. But dude, after like the first 10 lessons, you can do something more useful. Even before that, you shouldn't even start with Duolingo, in my opinion, because there's so much more you can do that's going to be quicker and more effective. But yes, it does make you learn words pretty well, and it also explains grammar. And one thing that is really good with Duolingo is the streaks and all the like XP and like championships and all of that stuff. It kind of motivates you to learn the language. Next thing is watching movies. The next thing is watching movies and TV shows with subtitles. This is your gold mine of language learning. This is one of the best things that you can do, and the reason why is because what you will do, this is what I recommend, this is how I've personally learned the most. You put on the TV show or movie in the foreign language that you're learning. You will also put on subtitles only in the foreign language, not in your own language, not in the language that you speak better, no, in the same foreign language. You will read that, and when you do not understand something, you will translate the word. If there's more than one word, you will translate them word by word, and then you will put together everything, okay? And then you will try to make it make sense. Something you do not want to do is just copy paste the entire sentence, put it into translate, for two reasons. First of all, it's lazy, and you will not learn as well. And then the second, because you just will not see which word is which, you won't understand it, okay? You will have to understand it. That's why you're going to translate word for word. And then the other thing is, translate is not that good with sentences, obviously. You probably know that already, especially when it comes to, something I recommend is, if you're using Google Translate, try to use it with English, okay? If your native language is not English and you're learning a foreign language, don't try to translate between those, because personally, if I do a Hungarian to Icelandic, what I will do is make Hungarian into English and then that into Icelandic, and it will be fucking terrible, okay? So just use English, please. But yeah, so Google Translate is not the best with sentences, but it is pretty nice with words. And then if you're using anything else, really, nothing is that good with sentences. And then when it comes to words, dictionaries are really good with words. So yeah, personally, what I'm trying to say is that word by word translation and then putting the pieces together is going to work for you the best and the quickest. And another thing that I will say is that, first of all, this will take a shit ton of time. When I first tried this, if I wanted to watch like a 45-minute episode of a TV show, I had to use twice as much of the time. So I had to look at it for 1.5 hours because it took me so much fucking time to translate. It's going to be like that when you start, but after that, your progress is going to be very, very fast. And eventually you will realize that now you only need like 10 extra minutes. You're watching like maybe a 50 minutes long episode and you will need 1 hour to watch it. So that's not a lot of translating because you will understand most of it. So this practice helps you a lot with vocabulary learning, yes, and also slangs, hearing things that people actually say in real life, because you don't really hear that maybe through language learning books and stuff like that. But when you listen to podcasts and movies and stuff like that, you actually hear what it sounds like when natives do speak. And it's also really fun. And the reason why I'm going to recommend you TV shows over movies is because they're really enjoyable, and movies as well. But usually when you're watching a show, you're going to want to watch the next episode, the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And you know, you will always have the motivation to watch the show because you, or to learn the language, yeah, both actually, because you will want to know the continuation of the show, and therefore you will have to watch the next episode, and therefore you will have to translate all of the stuff. Watching it with subtitles in a language that you speak well is not going to work that well, okay? Because it might work if you do it for 10 years, like 5 hours a day, okay? Keep in mind, I learned English with watching English stuff with Hungarian subtitles, but I was young and I looked at TV shows for like 5 hours a day, so obviously I learned it. And I also looked at YouTube and played games and shit like that, so it's not going to be enough, it's not going to be effective. So the best thing you can do is use only the foreign language and translate. One thing to keep in mind is you should choose shows that you like and you want to watch. Next thing is language learning books. I think language learning books are really useful tools. They're, in my opinion, much better than Duolingo if you use them to the fullest. The problem is a lot of people don't, and a lot of people just skip half of the tasks and all that shit. What has worked for me really well with Icelandic is I used a language learning book that was just purely in Icelandic, okay? And what I did was I didn't understand a single word from it when I started, and I just translated it again, word by word, and every single word that I didn't know, I just wrote it out and made a flashcard out of it. And then at the end of every lesson or chapter or whatever you want to call it of the book, I learned all of the words with the flashcards, and then I went on to the next one. And when I went on to the next one, there were already a couple of words that I knew, and I would make flashcards of the words that were new for me in that chapter, and then repeat. And also, obviously, these books will teach you the grammar as well. And so the next is going to be flashcards. Flashcards are really good for learning vocabulary. In my opinion, flashcards are especially useful when it comes to languages where you have a lot of rules, conjugations, every word has like 100 different forms and shit like that. The reason why is because, yeah, you can like buy or make flashcards that you flip, but it's kind of stupid. We have smartphones and we have applications that you can use to create your flashcards, and on certain apps you can put in links. And what you can do, and what I personally did, was using flashcards, and I would only write like the basic word in both languages, but I would link the site that has the declension table for the word, and then I would just see the word in English and then go to the website and just try to say the entire declension table in order in my head, and then check it if it was correct or not. It is also really useful for learning spelling. I already said that, but I'm going to say it again. You can learn spelling with it extremely well if you practice in a way that requires you to write the word and not just say it loud, or not even say it, but just think about it, okay? So this is overall a very quick and effective way of learning vocabulary. And also you can use them anywhere, anytime. Takes 5 minutes. You can sit on the bus and go through your flashcards in the morning. The only thing that's kind of a downside is that it can be a bit time consuming to make, but don't worry that much about that, okay? It's not that bad, and it's going to be really effective and useful. Next is speaking to a camera. This is really fucking useful, okay? Speaking, as I said, really important skill. Most people don't practice it. You do have to practice it. So it cannot be anytime, obviously, but it's really good for tracking your progress since you're recording yourself, and if you're keeping it, you can look back at it later. And also, it's just nice speaking to like somebody and not just the wall or something. And yeah, speaking is really useful, and it's very, very important. And it will also help you with vocabulary when you don't know something and you look up how to say it. I didn't do this with Norwegian. I only started doing this with Icelandic, and only after like maybe not a year but like half a year, and I wish I did it sooner. The next thing is going to be language teachers. Finally, I'm going to talk about the language teachers. A lot of people are like, but I can't afford the language teacher, so I can't learn the language. Bullshit. Do you think I needed language teachers? No. Did I have language teachers? Yes. But I only had language teachers in all 3 languages after I reached fluency alone, okay? The teachers usually didn't really teach me that much. Either what we did was just speak, so I had somebody to speak to and not just a fucking camera or something, or they explained grammar to me that I didn't understand. They answered questions that I had that you don't have to ask them, by the way. You can ask in subreddits. Most foreign languages have communities like subreddits on Reddit where you can ask questions. If you do not understand something, you can ask it, and maybe people will reply something useful, link a video that explains it, or something like that. Also, a teacher will be useful for that. Another time where I would say a teacher could be useful is when you're trying to prepare for like some exam, and it's really not really like teaching the language that's important. It's just teaching you what type of tasks you will have in the exam and practicing those. But you can also do that alone, so you don't need a teacher for that. Really, you don't need a teacher for anything. So it's no excuse if you can't have a teacher. And I will say that I appreciate my teachers, but I learn 99% alone. And even if you have a teacher, he or she will not be able to teach you the language because you will have to learn it yourself. You yourself will have to put in the effort. One thing they might be able to help you with is finding resources, but again, you can also do that on Reddit. I will talk about that later. Next thing, writing a journal. Not super useful in my opinion. Yeah, writing is useful, and I don't know, it's kind of like a downgraded version of speaking to me, in my opinion. Writing a journal is not the best practice when it comes to practicing writing, because I don't know, I would just rather write something else really, because it takes away from the language learning and it takes away from the purpose of the journal as well. So probably it's better to write like cool stories or something like that instead. Something you have to pay attention to though, both with writing and speaking, is don't limit yourself with not talking about and not writing about stuff that you cannot talk and write about, okay? That's exactly what you have to talk and write about. So don't finagle your way around it. That's the point of it, okay? If you're always you're never like running into a stone or a wall or something, yeah, maybe don't run into it, but yeah, so if you're never meeting a wall, if you're always just like going around them, it's not going to be very helpful, okay? You have to, like, this is the wall right here. What you have to do is do this. It was very epic. But instead, what you're doing is this. But the thing is, you're going to come back and blah, 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 and the wall is still going to be there because you didn't break it down. You didn't learn the word. You just went around it. So the wall didn't disappear. Keep in mind, you can go around the wall every single time, but it's going to take a fuck ton of time. And so it's easier to break down the wall, especially because the whole point of language learning is learning new, well, it's partly learning new words and phrases. And if you don't know the words and phrases that you need, you will need to learn them. And you can try to like think of something different, but that's just going around the wall and also not talking about that topic just because you are not able to talk about that. And so you're going to go back that way and the wall is still going to be there. And guess what? The more topics you cannot talk about, the more walls you have, and the more time it's going to take to go through the road that you're trying to go through, because you have a fuck ton of walls there and you have to go around all of them, and instead of just going like that, you're trying to go like woo all the time, and just it doesn't make any sense. Okay, if you don't know how to talk about something, learn the words, the phrases. That's language learning. Next thing, watching movies, back at it again, but without subtitles, okay? You can start doing this, or at least I recommend that you start doing this when you already understand the shows with subtitles pretty well, okay? So if, for example, you're watching something and it takes like an extra 5-10 minutes to watch, so you don't really need to use translate that much, you understand most of it with subtitles, that's a signal that you do not have too much to gain from that anymore, because you know most of it. And so if you know most of it, why do it? Okay, you want to discover what you don't know and learn it. So now you're still not that good at listening because you were just reading subtitles all along. So now you can turn them off and you will start listening and you won't understand shit, but in a matter of a couple episodes you will understand things much better. And also this will be good probably with something that you've already seen before, just first, so you don't get that scared, and that so you don't get like completely confused if you didn't understand something that was actually important when it comes to the plot. So only do this when you're pretty advanced, because before that it will not be very useful, because you will not be able to learn much vocabulary from it. And if your vocabulary isn't really 100%, obviously I already said that cannot be 100%, but if it's like 10%, then you have more important things to worry about than listening, okay? Because even if you understood what people were saying to you, even if you understand the words, you don't know what they mean, so it doesn't matter. The next is going to be listening to podcasts. I already said that this is not that useful, in my opinion, in terms of learning new things, really. It's useful when it comes to practicing listening, yes, but really it's very easy to zone out, so I don't like it as much as shows. I think watching movies and shows without subtitles is the meta. It's way too superior compared to listening to podcasts, but oftentimes you will not be able to look at a show, but you will be able to listen to a podcast, so that's when a podcast is a good option. But when you have both options, choose the movie, choose the TV show. It's really the best to listen to podcasts also when you don't have much time to learn during the day that's like high quality. So you have like 10 minutes to write or speak or something, or do something actually like really active, but you don't have any more time. Something you can do is listen to podcasts, because doing that is still going to be better than not doing even that. Listening to music, it's nice, okay? It's fun, but it isn't that useful. Vocabulary is usually not that relevant, and it's just not that useful. Reading books, it's fun, it's useful to a degree. It's good to learn vocabulary, but again, the vocabulary that is used in books is usually pretty advanced, and probably advanced to the point where you will not use most of the words that you will learn from books. It depends on what type of book you're reading, of course, but I don't recommend books that much. And also, as I already said, you don't need to like practice reading that much, so you can do more productive things when it comes to language learning. Books are one of those where, again, if you cannot really do anything else that's more productive, that's when you want to read books. And yeah, translate the words if you don't understand them, and that way you can learn vocabulary and you can like fucking 10x the effectiveness of that with making flashcards. Good thing is you can do it anywhere. Next thing is grammar, explaining sites and videos. Definitely really, really useful, okay? If you do not understand the part of the grammar, you just watch a video, you just look up a site that explains it, and then boom, you know it. But do not get too involved with this, okay? When it comes to a foreign language and speaking that, you want to speak it like a native. You don't want to speak it like a slow as robot that has to calculate everything, but it's too slow. So you realize that it's kind of like a robot, you know. So the reason why you do not want to get too overly brainy when it comes to grammar is because I'm not saying you won't use it in real life. I'm just saying you shouldn't. And I'm saying this in a way that what you should do when you speak, write, all of that shit is not think about grammar. First you will think about it, but you should get to the level where it will come naturally, and that's when you will really be native, fluent, and advanced when it comes to speaking a certain language. Because when you have to think about it still and you're trying to say something but you have like the shitty declension tables in your head and shit like that, it's not that good, okay? And it will take you time to say what you're trying to say, okay? So pay attention to that. It has to be a part of you and it has to become part of you, really. That's what it is. Understanding stuff obviously helps, but it's best to like engrave it in your mind in a way that you won't need to think about it after a certain point anymore. It will just come naturally to you. And the last thing is being in the country, which is very useful but is highly overrated. I learned most of Icelandic not in Iceland, okay? I learned most of Norwegian, almost all of Norwegian, not in Norway. I learned again almost all of English, not in America, England, or wherever where they speak English, okay? So very, very useful, but you can learn a language fluently without ever visiting the country. The first time I visited Norway was after learning for like 3 years, I think, and by that time I was fluent, and again, it was my first time being in Norway. I could perfectly communicate with locals, I could do anything that I wanted basically, and one night I just went to some random guys in like a pub, start talking to them, and we had like a several hour long conversation. So all I'm saying is it's no excuse. If you're trying to blame that, well, I'm not in the country and I don't know native speakers, I don't have a teacher. No, okay? Spit out the fucking black pill, sit down on your ass and study, because you're able to learn any language you want without any of these things. So now that we have talked about the methods of language learning, let's talk about outside factors. The first one is mindset. One mindset that is very important to have when it comes to language learning is using the language every single day, okay? That's what helps the most. How do you think you've learned your first language? You've used it every single day. And so that's exactly what you're trying to do when you're learning a foreign language as well. You want to use it as much as possible, and you want to use it as regularly as possible. And that's exactly why I recommend you to use the language every day. Even if it's only for 10 minutes, it's going to be better than using the language only once a week for an hour. And so even if one day you don't have the time to sit down and learn properly, you can just listen to 10 minutes of a podcast while commuting, or you can do whatever like that. You can learn languages for just 5 minutes a day, but it's still going to be better than zero, and it's still going to be better than learning languages half an hour once a week, okay? Learning languages 5 minutes every single day will be better than learning for half an hour once a week. You have to constantly put in the effort over the months and years. Okay, one important thing that training and language learning have in common is that the most important thing is consistency and also fun. If you're not having fun, you're going to stop doing it. That's why I recommend you to pick activities that you actually enjoy when it comes to both training and learning languages. That's exactly why I really recommend watching TV shows. But there will be tough times when you won't be motivated and you won't want to learn the language, and that's where discipline is key, okay? It's more important than everything else and anything else. Discipline is key when it comes to language learning because consistency is the most important thing. When you're unmotivated, you have to keep going. You have to sit down on your ass and study. And an important thing that will make it easier to be consistent is to actually know what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. And so for that, I recommend setting a daily goal. That's exactly what I did. I had a goal of learning at least 1 hour every single day. I could do more, but I couldn't do less. And so I usually didn't do less. And really the goal was to use the language for 1 hour every single day. If I had 0 minutes to focus on high quality studying, I would just listen to podcasts for an hour. But the point is, I would always use the language for an hour. And if I had the time, I would just sit down. Sometimes I would just speak for an hour straight. One thing where I do actually think that Duolingo is very useful is keeping you consistent, because of the stupid competitions and getting XP and streaks and all of that. That's very useful, and especially for beginners. But also, when you keep going, I think, yeah, it's not the most effective, but if you have like a 200-day streak and you don't want to fuck it up, yeah, you're going to go back for your lessons. So that's one good thing with it. But ideally, you should be consistent by yourself. And to be able to always do what you have to always reach the 1 hour or half an hour or whatever goal you set yourself, build language learning into your routine, okay? Every single day, if you go to work on your bus, maybe not on your bus, but if you go to work with the bus every single morning, you can always study on the bus. It's part of your routine, and so you link language learning to it. That's also going to be part of your routine. And also, something that I've learned is, if something is really important to you, doing it first thing after you wake up is the best thing you can do. Because if you leave it for later in the day, there's a chance that you won't do it. But if you wake up and the first thing you have to do is to learn languages, for an example, that's exactly what you're going to do, because you know that everything comes afterwards. Right now you could be like, what the fuck does sleep have to do with language learning? Actually quite a lot, okay? People say, or at least a lot of people I've met said that I am talented and I have like I don't have difficulties learning languages and shit like that. And, oh, it's so easy for you, you're so talented. Like, first of all, how do you know? You barely even know me. But let's not talk about that. I'm going to actually make a video about talent and genetics and all that, because it's really pissing me off. It's an important topic, but let's reserve it for later. The point is, what they don't know is that while they sleep 5-6 hours every single day, I sleep like 9. That's how much I need. How much sleep you need will be completely determined by genetics, so I'm not saying that you have to sleep 9 hours as well. Some people are fine sleeping 6, some people are only fine sleeping like 10. I'm fine sleeping like 9, I guess. But the point is, if you're not sleeping enough, it's going to have an effect on your ability to learn languages. It's been scientifically proven that sleep deprivation has a significant negative effect on you being able to learn new stuff. And language learning is exactly that. And also, increasing your sleep and sleeping enough is going to improve your ability to learn new things. So basically, the more you sleep, the easier time you will have learning languages. Now, obviously, it's not only about time, it's also about sleep quality. But the point is, the more and the better sleep you're going to get, the better it is going to be for you to learn languages. Now, let's also talk a bit about diet and exercise. I won't go into it because it doesn't really matter. I have an entire channel on diet and exercise mostly. The only point I want to make is that it's been proven numerous times, and I think it's pretty common knowledge, that good diet and regular exercise helps you with achieving better results when it comes to studying. And at last, stress. If you have a lot of stress in your life, try reducing it. And in general, if your life is very chaotic and you never have the time to do anything, maybe think twice before starting to learn a new language. Now, let's talk a bit about resources. I'd like to begin with the fact that language learning is free. It doesn't cost anything. All you need is a mobile phone and internet, or a computer or whatever. All you need is internet access and some sort of electronic device. And with that, you can learn a language completely without any more money. There are a bunch of methods that require you to spend money, but none of them are necessary. None of them are essential. You can find a lot of shows in foreign languages on Netflix. I know that Netflix costs money, but most people have a subscription, so it's not the end of the world. But personally, when learning Norwegian, for example, I never watched anything on Netflix. Most Scandinavian countries have some sort of like broadcasting site. Also, something that I've mentioned before is that most languages have subreddits on Reddit, where you can ask questions and also you can find a fuck ton of resources. They're really nice because there's a lot of resources, ideas, a lot of thoughts from people who have tried to learn the language before. And also if you don't understand something regarding grammar or something like that, you can just ask it. And now that we come pretty much to the end of this video, I'm going to answer a couple of frequently asked questions. The first is, how long will it take to speak X language? Now, first of all, everybody has a different idea of when you speak a language, because as I've said before, there's no such thing as speaking a language basically. It's just at a certain point you're like, okay, I'm fluent now, but it's actually you who's deciding. Personally, what I would say is the point at which you're speaking a language is where you can pretty much say everything you want, even if it's limited vocabulary and not perfectly, but you can just say everything you want and you know basically all of grammar that is important. If you don't know some gigabrain shit, it's not a big problem, because if not even natives use it, it doesn't matter that much. But yeah, now reaching that level is not that difficult, okay? If you don't fuck around a lot, it's going to be pretty quick. Now this will all depend on the language you're trying to learn and also the effort that you're willing to put in. But I would say that with 1 hour a day of highly effective language learning, so not just listening to podcasts while zoning out, but actually paying attention and using tactics that are very useful. If you're not half-assing it, even like the hardest fucking languages should go in a few years. And when it comes to easier languages, again, it depends obviously on how easy the language is, but I would say like 1 to 2 years, maybe 3 is going to be plenty to learn a simple language. Like Norwegian is very simple, and I've half-assed a lot, to be honest, when it comes to Norwegian. I think I reached fluency around after a year of studying, maybe. All that I remember is when I started, I listened to a podcast that I didn't understand shit from, and 1 year later I listened to the same thing and I could understand all of it. And when it comes to Icelandic, I'd say that I reached fluency after about 1.5 years, but that was much more intense language learning than what I did with Norwegian, but it's also a much more difficult language. And so even if you think that I am talented, if I could pull this off, then maybe for you learning Icelandic with the same level of effort will take 3 years, or Norwegian 2 years, but it's still pretty good. And it's like, I don't think personally that it should take more than 5 years if you're not half-assing it. Next question. Is it expensive? No, it's free. All you need is internet and a phone or a computer, iPad, something like that. Besides teachers that I started having after already reaching fluency alone, I didn't really spend any money on language learning. All I spent money on was 2 ebooks total, and I once spent like $10 on a VPN or something like that. But I didn't need any of these, it was just simply more convenient. The first question is going to be, how hard is learning a language? And what the fuck is hard in learning a language? I just personally do not understand. There's nothing hard. There's nothing like when you're trying to do like a 30 rep set or something of like call phrases. Well, that's fucking hard. But when it comes to language learning, like, what's so painful about it? It's just repetition. The more you do it, the better you get. There's nothing painful about it, in my opinion. Use effective methods over and over and over again, and you will easily learn a language, and it's not very hard, in my opinion. The fourth question is, am I too old to learn a foreign language? If you're dead, yes. If you're not, no. You're too old to do something when you're dead, because then you're not able to do it. But unless you're dead, you're not too old for anything, okay? This is something that people started saying to justify not putting the work. And first people who are actually old started saying it, and then people in their 50s and their 40s, and now people in their 30s, they're like, well, now I'm too old to learn a language. what the fuck are you talking about, man? You're 30. If it takes you 5 years to learn a language, then you're 35 and you've learned a language, and let's assume that you're going to learn until you're 70, you got another half of your life where you can use the language. You're never too old, okay? And you never know when you're going to die. If you're 70, and let's say you're going to live until 80, but you have no idea about that. But even if you know, you start learning a language, it takes you 5 years to learn it. You're 75, you still got another 5 years to speak it. Most people just sabotage themselves, their own work, by saying that they're too old for anything new after the age of like 40. Okay, age doesn't matter anything when it comes to language learning. And even when people tell you that, yeah, but when you're like 5 years old, it's so much easier to learn a language. Yeah, and so what? All I hear from that is, okay, when you're 5 years old, it's so much easier to learn a language. So if I'm 40, it's harder. So if I still do it, I'm a lot fucking cooler. That's all I'm hearing, bro. Age is no excuse, and it will never make it possible for you to learn a language. Learning a language is completely mental as well. Like, if we're talking about running a marathon, but just wait 1 minute. But if we're talking about something physical that you cannot do anymore because you're not in that condition, well, first of all, that's mostly your fault, but that's a bit more understandable. Well, we're talking about language learning right now, okay? You're never too old. I don't give a shit how old you are. Start today. After watching this video, first thing you're going to do is learn your first 5 words. Learn them, say them out loud. Congratulations, you started learning the language. Now keep at it, and you're going to speak the language in like 5 years, most likely, if you're doing things correctly. And just a bit of story time when it comes to old age. I have somebody in my family who's, I think, like 8 years old at this point, or no, I think he was 8 years old like 2 years ago or something. So he's like 82 now, and he's still alive, obviously. And as far as I remember, he had like some health issues or something, and at like 60 years old, he started running, and he ran so much, eventually he started running marathons after the age of 60. And now that he's become 80 a couple of years ago, he was like, okay, I'm 80 now, I'm only going to run half marathons now. Like, dude, you can do anything, and it doesn't matter how old you are. If that guy in my family, if that man could start running marathons after the age of 60, you can too. And you can learn a language, you can do anything. 5th question, how to get motivated. Don't. When it comes to language learning, you do not need motivation, you need discipline. Motivation will fade, okay? And language learning is not a game of motivation. It's not a burst of learning 5 hours every single day for like 2 months straight and then quitting. Language learning is consistency. Language learning is learning the language every single day, and therefore what you will need is discipline and not motivation, because you won't have the motivation all of the time. And when you don't have the motivation, you will still have to practice the language, and for that you will need discipline. You have to do it even when you don't feel like it, and it should just be a habit that you do not even think about, you just do automatically. And the last question is going to be, which language should I learn? I looked on the internet for these questions, and I just typed in like language learning FAQ, and on a lot of places I found this question: which language should I learn? Bro, what the fuck? You don't know what language you're trying to learn? It's not me who should answer that, it's you. You want to learn the language, so why are you asking me which language you should learn? If you don't know which language you want to learn, you probably shouldn't learn a language, okay? You should decide at first. I don't know what you need the language for, but if you don't even know what language you need, you probably don't need it. Learn a language that interests you. Learn a language if you want to move to the country, or if you find the language cool, okay? Don't decide to learn a language first and then start looking for the language. I think it should be like reverse. You should decide like, oh my god, this language, I like this language, I want to learn it. Or I want to move to this country, so I have to learn the language that they speak. Okay, this is a question that I simply cannot answer. And I think the only situation in which this could be a valid question is if you don't actually want to learn a language, but you have to for some sort of degree or exam or something. And in that case, you want to learn the easiest language you can that will be the easiest for you specifically that they accept. And for that, you can just search the internet. And as a bonus tip, something that can help a lot is try to find a friend or maybe even a boyfriend, girlfriend who speaks the language that you're trying to learn. Even better if he or she only speaks the language that you're trying to learn, and that will probably help you a lot. Just don't do it like a colleague, an ex-colleague of mine that, oh my god, she had a husband that she spoke English with, but she didn't speak a single fucking word in English. And she didn't even try to learn it properly. So I don't know how they communicated, but they only had one language in common. And personally, I had to work with her every single day, and I couldn't talk with her properly. So maybe don't do it like that. Maybe try to actually learn from each other. But yeah, and as the last words, most important thing when it comes to language learning is to not burn out. Make it sustainable. Do it every single day. You don't need to do as much as humanly possible, because the most important thing is that you continue. It's not how much you do all at once, it's how long you're going to do it for. And since language learning is exactly like bodybuilding, it never has an end, you can always improve. That's why you shouldn't rush it, because you want to do it forever. And I'd like to leave you with that. I hope that you learn everything that you needed to learn the foreign language that you want. Peace.